The Civil War's last major cavalry clash fought a week after Lee's surrender at Appomattox. It's a story of ambition, blunders, burning bridges, literally, and two young Union hotshots eager to carve their names into history. Columbus, Georgia in 1865 was no sleepy town. It was an industrial powerhouse, churning out cannons, gunboats, uniforms, and gunpowder for the Confederacy. Across the Chattahoochee River sat Girard, Alabama, today Phoenix City, a smaller town but strategically vital because of its bridges. Whoever controlled those bridges controlled the gateway into Georgia. The Confederacy was collapsing. Communications were slow, armies were scattered, and most veteran troops had been pulled east to the Carolinas. What remained in Columbus were militias, Georgia reserves, and state line troops, old men, young boys, and anyone who could still hold a musket. In short, not exactly the A-team. Wilson was only 27 years old at the time, a boyish-looking major general with a resume longer than his patience. Born in Illinois, raised in a modest family, he had tried his hand at business before the war and failed spectacularly. But war was his stage. He graduated from West Point just as the conflict erupted and quickly rose through the ranks thanks to his sharp mind, boldness, and connections with Grant. Sherman, disgusted with his cavalry's performance during the Atlanta campaign, asked Grant for a replacement. Grant recommended Wilson. And so, Wilson took command of the Cavalry Corps of the Military Division of the Mississippi. He reorganized it, armed it with Spencer repeating rifles, 7 shots before reloading, a game changer, and turned it into a juggernaut of 13,000 troopers. Wilson's mission: knock out the South's last industrial centers, and above all, neutralize the legendary Confederate cavalryman Nathan Bedford Forrest. Grant famously told him, it would be worth the lives of 10,000 men to have Forrest out of the war. Wilson took that to heart. Selma, Alabama, April 2, 1865. Wilson smashed Forrest's defenses, captured Selma, and destroyed its arsenal. Montgomery, April 12. The Confederate capital of Alabama fell without a fight. Columbus, April 16. The next target? The industrial jewel on the Chattahoochee. Cobb was no ordinary Confederate commander. He had been U.S. Speaker of the House, Governor of Georgia, and Secretary of the Treasury under Buchanan. Now, in 1865, he was overweight, weary, and commanding the Georgia reserves, essentially militia and second-class troops. Still, he was determined to defend his hometown. Cobb's men tore up the floors of the bridges, stuffed them with cotton soaked in turpentine, and prepared to set them ablaze if Union cavalry tried to cross. Wilson's second-in-command was Emory Upton, just 25 years old, another West Point prodigy. Ambitious, brilliant, and hungry for glory, Upton begged Wilson to let him lead the assault on Columbus. Wilson agreed. Upton knew the war was ending, and this was his last chance to shine. Phase 1. Morning. Confederate cavalry under Abraham Buford skirmished with Wilson's advance guard near Crawford, Alabama. Upton cleverly bypassed them, sending a decoy force down the main road, while his main column swung south to avoid getting bogged down. Phase 2, afternoon. By 1:30 p.m., Union forces reached the hills above Girard. From there, they could see Columbus, the Chattahoochee River, and the 2 bridges, the City Bridge and the Upper Bridge. Wilson had burned his pontoon bridges earlier to speed his march, so these crossings were vital. As the Union cavalry thundered toward the City Bridge at Columbus, sabers flashing, horses pounding, dust flying, they thought they were about to storm across into Georgia glory. Instead, they were riding straight into a Confederate mousetrap. As they got close, the troopers realized the Confederates had ripped up the planks of the bridge and stuffed the hollowed floor with cotton soaked in turpentine. It was essentially a giant firebomb waiting to be lit. The Union charge halted in confusion. Shots rang out, sabers clashed, and then flames. Whether the Confederates lit it deliberately or it caught by accident, the bridge went up like a torch. The Union men pulled back, frustrated. The bridge was gone. Columbus still stood defiant. After the fiery fiasco, Union forces tried to regroup. Some were ordered to swing north and conceal themselves. They took that order so literally they vanished into the woods. General Emory Upton, ambitious, 25 years old, desperate for glory, spent the afternoon riding around like a man searching for his lost car keys. The Confederates couldn't see the Union troops. Upton couldn't see them either. For hours the battlefield was eerily quiet, save for minor skirmishes. Finally, near sunset, Upton found his missing brigade. General James Wilson arrived, furious, and had a heated argument with the brigade commander about whether orders had been misunderstood or followed too literally. Either way, they decided, tonight we fight. As darkness fell on April 16, 1865, Union cavalry prepared for one last push. The target, the Franklin Street Bridge, the northern crossing over the Chattahoochee River. Like its twin, the City Bridge, it had been rigged by Confederates with turpentine-soaked cotton and guarded by cannons at the Columbus end. In theory, it was a death trap. In practice, it became a comedy of confusion. Union troopers stormed the earthworks, clashing hand-to-hand with defenders. Muskets flared, sabers flashed, and men grappled in the dark like brawlers in a tavern fight. The smoke and night made it impossible to tell who was who. Soldiers from both sides tumbled together across the bridge. Here's the twist. The Confederate gunners and fire-setters, crouched at the Columbus end, couldn't tell if the figures charging toward them were friend or foe. Afraid of blasting their own men, they hesitated. The cannon stayed silent. The cotton stayed unlit. The trap never sprung. By sheer accident of confusion, the Union captured the bridge intact. Columbus was theirs. The fighting was intense but surprisingly brief. Veterans swore the musket fire was the most ferocious they'd ever endured, yet casualties were low, about 48 Union killed, a few dozen Confederates, and hundreds captured. Darkness had shielded both sides. But the destruction afterward was merciless. For 2 days, Wilson's men dismantled Columbus's war machine. Warehouses burned. The magazine exploded, shattering windows across town. The CSS Jackson ironclad was seized and torched. A Confederate gunboat was scuttled, and a torpedo boat captured but sank while being towed. Downtown businesses were looted, mill workers' tenements burned, and civilians left in hardship. Columbus's industrial capacity, once a jewel of the Confederacy, was annihilated. Out of this chaos came one of history's strangest legacies. John Pemberton, a Confederate cavalryman and Columbus druggist, fought in the hand-to-hand melee at the Franklin Street Bridge. He was shot and slashed by a saber, his life saved only because the blow was deflected by a money belt. Racked with pain afterward, Pemberton concocted a medicinal formula to ease his suffering. That formula evolved into Coca-Cola. Yes, the world's most famous soft drink owes its origins to a saber slash at Columbus. Today, Pemberton's grave in Linwood Cemetery is covered with Coke bottles left by visitors. Sometimes even Mellow Yellow shows up, proof that Southerners never miss a chance to mix humor with history. Columbus also claims a role in the birth of Memorial Day. In 1866, women decorated Confederate graves at Linwood Cemetery, a ceremony photographed and later echoed in the North. General John Logan promoted it nationally. Several towns claim the honor, but Columbus's case is strong. Confederate dead lay on the battlefield for days before being collected and buried in scattered cemeteries, Linwood, Girard, and others nearby. Union dead were retrieved quickly by ambulance corps. Union casualty records, however, tell a murkier story. Official reports list only about 48 killed and a modest number wounded. Yet company-level records suggest far more injuries. Historians suspect a deliberate purge of wounded lists to make Wilson's raid look cleaner, more efficient, and less costly than it really was. In other words, a bit of 19th-century spin doctoring. The Battle of Columbus was overshadowed by Appomattox, Lincoln's assassination, and the collapse of the Confederacy. But for those who fought, it was unforgettable. The last major cavalry clash of the war, fought in smoke, fire, and confusion. It gave Wilson his final triumph, Upton his taste of glory, Cobb his bitter defeat, and Pemberton his painful inspiration. Out of the ashes of Columbus came not only the end of the Confederacy's industrial might, but also the beginning of Coca-Cola and the tradition of Memorial Day. And that, dear viewers, is the story of Columbus, where sabers clashed, bridges burned, and history fizzed into a bottle. Subscribe to our channel for more spectacular journeys into history's forgotten corners, where politics, plots, and personalities collide in mud, smoke, and glory.